The millionaire chuckled coldly. "Translate this by morning, and my entire monthly salary is yours." His voice dripped with arrogance. What he expected was silence or perhaps a nervous stammer. What he got instead was a calm, unwavering reply that stopped the room cold. The laughter died mid-breath. The air in the mahogany-paneled office turned heavy with disbelief. What began as a cruel joke, a black maid being publicly mocked for the amusement of wealthy executives, was about to unravel into something none of them were prepared for. At the center of the spectacle was Richard Langston, a tech tycoon drunk on champagne and ego. But the woman he mocked, Claire Thomas, carried a secret, one that would soon flip the balance of power and expose a truth buried for 2 decades. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's one of justice, brilliance, and long overdue respect. Laughter echoed off crystal chandeliers and the high-gloss wood of the conference room. The air was thick with pride, wealth, and something less noble mockery. Richard Langston, billionaire CEO of Langston Dynamics, leaned back in his Italian leather chair, swirling a glass of top-shelf cognac with one hand while waving a thick, foreign-language dossier with the other. "Gentlemen," he said, slurring slightly, he dropped the packet onto the polished table with a dramatic thud. "This right here is what's standing between us and our next billion." Applause rose from the table. Executives, investors, and senior partners nodded and toasted. Everyone in that room was rich enough to retire twice, yet still hungry for more. Everyone except one person. Near the door, silent and invisible, stood the housemaid. Dark-skinned, dressed in a pressed uniform with spotless white gloves, she quietly began to clear half-finished drinks from side tables, moving as she had for years, unseen and unacknowledged. Her name was Claire Thomas. But not one man in that room, including her employer, could have told you that. Richard's gaze shifted to her with a smirk. An idea twisted in his alcohol-soaked mind, a cruel one. "Claire," he called suddenly. She paused, glasses in hand, eyes lifting slowly. "Come here for a moment, would you?" She approached, wary, her footsteps soft on the thick Persian rug. The room fell into a hush, all eyes now on her. Richard held up the packet. "Claire, darling, this is a contract from our Chinese partners, 50 pages of tight, technical Mandarin. Our legal department claims it's too complex to translate before next week. But I had a thought." He grinned, cruel and charming all at once. "If you can translate this by tomorrow morning, I'll give you my monthly salary." He leaned in slightly, his voice low and smug. "That's $512,000, tax-exempt." A ripple of snide chuckles ran through the room. Claire stood perfectly still. Her face betrayed nothing. No shock, no hurt. Just a steady, unreadable calm. "Come on, Richard," Diane Wesley said, a senior VP with pearl earrings and a brittle laugh. "She's a maid, not a machine. Mandarin? Seriously." Richard waved off her protest. "It's just a little fun, Diane. I'm giving her a chance of a lifetime. Who knows? Maybe she's secretly fluent in 30 languages." More laughter. Claire reached out and took the folder. "I accept," she said simply. A beat passed. The room went still. Richard blinked. "What did you say?" "I accept your challenge, Mr. Langston," she repeated, her voice steady. "I'll have the translation ready by morning." For a long second, no one knew whether to laugh or frown. Then Richard erupted into a fresh round of guffaws. "Fantastic!" he shouted, standing to toast again. "We'll see you bright and early, Claire." She nodded once, turned, and walked out of the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. But something had shifted. The laughter didn't feel as comfortable anymore. There was something about her calm, about the way she held herself, as if this wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her. As Claire walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, her fingers tightened around the thick packet. She could still hear the laughter echoing behind her, bouncing off the cold marble and the glass walls of the Langston estate. She'd cleaned these rooms for 18 years. She knew every inch of this house, every crack in the tiles, every face that passed through it. but no one had ever truly seen her. Until now. Claire didn't rush. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she walked into the staff quarters, sat at her small desk, and turned on the old desk lamp her daughter had given her 5 years ago for Christmas. A soft amber glow lit the room. She opened the folder. Pages of dense Chinese characters stared back at her. Legal terminology, technical language, a minefield of subtle phrasing. Claire didn't hesitate. She reached for a worn leather notebook on her shelf. She hadn't opened it in years. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped it open and stared at the name written on the first page. Dr. Clarissa Michelle Thomas, Ph.D. in Linguistic Anthropology, fluent in Mandarin, Cantonese, and Korean. A name no one in the Langston household had ever known. She turned to a fresh page, picked up a pen, and began translating. Line by line, clause by clause, quietly, unflinchingly, because the challenge wasn't just about the money. It was never about the money. It was about dignity. It was about being seen. And Richard Langston had just handed her the stage. The night deepened outside the Langston estate. Rain began to whisper against the windows, a soft percussion in the silence of the maid's quarters. But Claire didn't hear it. Her focus was absolute. Chinese characters flowed across the page like currents in a storm. She scribbled notes in the margins, cross-referencing terminology, checking for nuances most translators would miss. For her, this wasn't difficult, it was familiar. Muscle memory from another life. In the corner of her room sat a locked metal box. She hadn't opened it in years. Now, her fingers moved to it almost unconsciously. The lock clicked open. Inside were fragments of the woman she used to be. Certificates, awards, a faded Stanford University ID with a much younger face smiling back. Dr. Clarissa Michelle Thomas. Once, she'd been among the youngest linguistics professors in the Ivy League. Her specialty, high-stakes cross-cultural legal translation. Her lectures had been packed, her name cited in academic journals worldwide. And then she disappeared. Claire exhaled sharply and pushed the memory back. This wasn't the time to relive the betrayal. Not yet. She returned to the documents. It was almost laughable how confident Richard had been. The contract was written not just in Mandarin, but in intentionally convoluted legalese, riddled with traps. She read one clause twice, then a third time. Her eyes narrowed. What is this? It wasn't just a standard trade agreement. Buried in paragraph 6.3 was a clause stating that, in the event of internal conflict, all decision-making control defers to the partner firm's advisory board. And that board? Fully appointed by the foreign firm. In essence, if the contract were signed, Langston Dynamics would quietly cede operational authority to an overseas partner. It was a hostile takeover in the form of paperwork, and no one had seen it. Not the board, not the legal team, not even Richard. Claire stared at the page. Slowly, a grim expression settled on her face. They think I'm just a maid, but I may be the only one in this house who actually understands what's at stake. 2 hours passed, then 3. Her desk was now a battlefield of notes, sticky tabs, reference books, and digital dictionaries. She was halfway through translating when her vision blurred from fatigue. She stepped into the kitchen for a moment. The light was off. The whole house was asleep, except for the distant hum of security cameras and the quiet tick of the grandfather clock down the hall. Claire poured herself some tea. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion layered with adrenaline. As she sipped, her mind wandered to her daughter, Layla. She was the reason Claire had taken the maid job in the first place. After her reputation had been destroyed, she needed to disappear, to survive. She'd taken the Langston job under a new name. No one here had ever connected her to the infamous academic scandal that ended her career. Accused of plagiarism, framed by jealous colleagues, abandoned by her institution. The media called it a disgraceful fall from grace. She called it something else. A lynching in slow motion. But tonight, this ridiculous challenge Richard thought was a joke. It had opened a door she thought was permanently shut. Not back to fame or even academia, but to her own self-respect. Claire looked at the clock. It was 2:47 a.m. She went back to the desk and kept going. At 4:10 a.m., Claire picked up her phone. There was only one person she trusted with what she'd just uncovered. She scrolled through her contacts and found the name, Professor Henry Osei. He'd been her colleague during the Stanford years, one of the few who had believed her, stood by her when everyone else had turned away. She tapped call. It rang twice before a sleepy, familiar voice answered. Claire. Henry, she said, voice low. I need your help. He sat up instantly. Say the word. She explained the contract, the language, the clause. Henry listened silently, taking it in. That's a shell clause, he said finally. Designed to transfer soft authority without triggering alert systems. I've seen them used in tech espionage cases. I knew it, Claire whispered, but I need someone to verify it. I'll look over everything, he said. Email it now. I'll wake up my legal analyst. She hung up, scanned the pages and sent the files. Then, with barely 30 minutes of rest, she returned to the translation. At 7:03 a.m., the estate was coming alive. Staff were arriving. The kitchen hummed with the sound of coffee brewing and breakfast preparation. Claire had showered, changed, and packed the translated document, typed, annotated with a supplemental legal memo attached. Her presentation was clean and precise. She stood before the mirror in her room, taking one last look at herself. No maid's uniform today. Instead, a tailored blazer she hadn't worn in over a decade. Her hair was neatly pinned, her shoes polished. The quiet authority in her posture was unmistakable. Claire Thomas, Ph.D., had returned. She just wore a different name now. She took the folder and walked out of the room, each step deliberate. In the boardroom, Richard Langston was already seated, the same smug expression on his face as the night before. His hangover was masked by caffeine and arrogance. When Claire walked in, silence followed. He blinked. His expression shifted just slightly, not recognition but confusion, as if he didn't quite know what he was looking at. Claire walked straight to the head of the table. You asked for the translation, she said, placing the folder in front of him. It's done. Richard smirked, opening the file with theatrical flair. The smirk faded as he read the first page. Then the second. His fingers tightened. What is this? Claire didn't flinch. Your contract. Fully translated. Also, highlighted sections with hidden clauses that grant full decision-making authority to your partners. The room went dead quiet. This can't be right, Richard muttered. I had a second expert verify it, Claire said. You're about to sign away your company. Unless, of course, that was your intention. A beat passed. Then another. No one laughed this time. Richard Langston's hands trembled as he flipped through the annotated pages. The silence around the boardroom was no longer polite or passive. It had turned acidic. Unease spread through the room like a slow fog. No one moved. No one dared speak. What do you mean, they'd have control? Richard finally asked, though the answer was already in black and white. Claire stood at the head of the table, calm as ever. The document outlines an ownership clause disguised as a partnership term. Clause 6.3 hands operational authority to a partner advisory board composed entirely of executives from May Holdings. You wouldn't just be collaborating, you'd be surrendering. Richard's jaw worked, but nothing came out. Diane Wesley leaned in, grabbing the document. She scanned it quickly, her brows pulling tighter with every line. She's right, she muttered, stunned. How did this get through legal? Claire's voice didn't waver. Your legal team couldn't translate the document with the accuracy needed. You said so yourself. They missed the trap. She reached into her satchel and pulled out another document. Professor Henry Osei's signed verification of the translation, complete with expert annotations. She passed it down the table. Here's independent confirmation from an international legal linguist. Richard looked pale. This is insane, he said. There's no way they could get away with this. They almost did, Claire replied evenly. And you almost helped them. For the first time, the mask of arrogance cracked. Richard Langston stared at Claire like he was seeing her for the first time. Not as a maid, not as a background fixture in his home, but as something else entirely. Someone dangerous. Someone brilliant. He cleared his throat, struggling to regain control of the room. Well, lucky for us you caught it. I suppose I underestimated you, Claire. No, she said, stepping closer. You didn't underestimate me, Mr. Langston. You never even considered I might be capable. That's worse. Her words hit like a slap. Someone coughed softly. Another executive lowered his eyes. Diane looked up. Claire, where did you learn Mandarin like this? And legalese? This isn't something you pick up as a hobby. Claire hesitated. Her gaze drifted toward the window, her posture tight. The moment was here. The line she had tiptoed around for years had finally drawn itself in front of her. She exhaled, slowly. My name is Claire Thomas. But before I took that name, I was known as Dr. Clarissa Michelle Thomas, professor of linguistic anthropology and technical translation at Stanford University. A gasp rippled through the room. I specialized in legal and diplomatic Chinese. My work was cited internationally. Until I was falsely accused of academic misconduct and blackballed by my own department. Richard sat back, stunned. That can't be true. It is, Claire said. The story made headlines for a few weeks. You probably read about it. Disgraced scholar vanishes after scandal. That was me. Why would someone like you end up here? Diane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I had to disappear, Claire answered. Because the academic world decided a successful black woman didn't belong in a position of power. They erased me to protect their own. So I reinvented myself, quietly, where no one would look twice. She straightened. Until now, no one laughed. No one smirked. The smug grins from the previous night had evaporated. Richard looked down at the document again. He didn't speak. His fingers still trembled. Your translation, he said finally. It saved this company. Probably billions. I didn't do it for you, Claire replied coolly. I did it because your failure would have taken down hundreds of innocent employees. And because I won't be humiliated in my own skin again. The meeting adjourned without a word. Richard sat in the boardroom for several minutes after everyone had left. The translation sat in front of him like a confession. The pages were too clean, too precise. Every word a mirror to his arrogance. He'd tried to make a joke of her. And now she'd exposed not only a billion-dollar mistake, but the gaping void of his own ignorance. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling in his vast penthouse, his mind racing. Claire's face haunted him, not out of fear, but out of shame. Her voice rang in his ears. You didn't underestimate me. You never even considered me. It was the truth. And it hurt. Downstairs, Claire was back in her room, staring at her own reflection. Her uniform hung in the closet. She would never wear it again. Not because she was ashamed of her work, but because she had earned the right to step into her power again. She looked over at her desk. The contract, the notes, the validation, they were all neatly organized. But the part that mattered most couldn't be filed away. She had been seen. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. Her phone buzzed. A message from Henry. Just saw the clause went public. Your name's on the internal leak. You okay? She smiled faintly. More than okay. It's starting. The next morning, Richard knocked on Claire's door himself. She opened it cautiously. He wasn't in his usual tailored suit. Just slacks and a button-down. No arrogance. No smirk. I need to talk to you, he said quietly. Claire nodded, stepping aside. He entered the small room, his eyes scanning the space that had been her life for nearly 2 decades. It was humble, immaculate, efficient, and deeply personal. I don't know what I can say, Richard began. I'm not sure any apology would sound sincere, but I owe you one anyway. Claire didn't interrupt. She watched him closely. I've treated you like background, like a machine that appeared and disappeared when I needed you. I never once asked who you were. No, you didn't, Claire said softly. And the truth is, he continued, you saved me, and this company, from my own recklessness, and I want to make it right. Claire raised a brow. With money, he shook his head. No, with action, with acknowledgement, and with a position. She tilted her head. I want to offer you a role permanent at the executive level. In the international division, lead translator, contract evaluator, and cultural liaison. You'll report only to me. Claire stared at him. You think a title makes this better? I think respect might be a good place to start, he said. And I think you've earned far more than I ever gave you credit for. Claire didn't answer right away. She walked past him, stood by the window, and watched the morning light begin to push through the trees. Then she turned. I'll think about it. Claire stood before the mirror again that evening, the offer still ringing in her ears. Executive leadership, respect, recognition. It was everything she'd lost, and everything she'd long ago taught herself to live without. There had been years when she convinced herself the quiet dignity of doing her job was enough. But that wasn't true. Not anymore. She touched the blazer hanging on the back of her chair. The same one she wore to the boardroom. The same one that once symbolized prestige, position, and respect, but also betrayal and loss. A flicker of doubt ran through her chest. Could she really return to a world that once erased her? Would this company be any different? Or was this just another layer of guilt-driven theater? She needed space to think. Claire grabbed her coat and stepped out into the night. The streets were quiet, wet with recent rain. She walked slowly, her thoughts jumbled. Streetlights reflected in puddles like golden ghosts. As she turned the corner, she spotted a familiar cafe, Odetta's Place, a neighborhood gem she hadn't visited in years. Inside it was warm, dim. Jazz hummed in the background. She ordered tea and sat in a corner booth. The server didn't recognize her, and that was just fine. Out came her notebook. She flipped to a blank page and began writing. Prose, platform to correct injustice from within, use of skills and knowledge again, financial independence, setting an example for Layla, for others, cons, hostile environment, isolation at the top, risk of being targeted again, reopening old wounds. She stared at the page, then crossed out cons and wrote, challenges to overcome. For the first time in years, the fear didn't paralyze her, fueled her. Back at the Langston estate the next morning, Claire found an envelope waiting on her nightstand. Inside was a formal contract offer, title, salary, relocation assistance, benefits, and most notably, departmental oversight, international legal affairs, plus cultural risk assessment. Reports directly to CEO. The compensation was eye-watering, more than she'd ever made as a professor. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was the second page. A personal letter, handwritten. Claire, you don't owe me an answer, but I owe you more than a position. I owe you a public correction of the injustice I helped perpetuate for 2 decades. If you accept, your name, your real name, will never again be hidden. I will stand beside you when you're introduced to the company not as the maid who surprised us, but as the expert who saved everything. Sincerely, Richard Langston. 3 days later, the elevator chimed on the 38th floor of Langston Dynamics Tower. Claire stepped out, dressed sharply in a charcoal suit, hair pulled into a neat bun, eyes forward and unshaken. At her side, Richard walked with measured dignity. Around them, whispers erupted like wildfire. Is that her? The maid? No, someone said she was a former professor or something. Why is she with the CEO? Richard cleared his throat. He stopped at the glass-walled conference room where the international division met every Monday morning. Inside sat half a dozen executives, senior staff, and department heads. He pushed open the door. Good morning, Richard said, addressing the room. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce your new division leader, Dr. Clarissa Thomas will be overseeing all global partnerships, contract vetting, and cross-cultural risk initiatives from this point forward. Mouths fell open. A few stood awkwardly. Some didn't move at all. Claire stepped forward. "Good morning," she said, calm and clear. "I look forward to working with each of you." No one clapped. The meeting began. It was cold. Not one staff member met her eyes fully. David Randall, the longtime director of Foreign Legal Affairs, spoke over her twice. Subtle digs. Questions phrased like traps. Others chuckled nervously. Claire responded with unshakable clarity and detail. When she dismantled one of David's misleading projections using hard data and corrected legal interpretation, he gave a tight smile and leaned back in his chair. She had just won her first silent battle and earned her first enemy. That afternoon, Richard visited her new office, a glass-walled suite that overlooked the city skyline. It was immaculate, modern, and impersonal. He set down a cup of coffee on her desk. "You handled them well," he said. "I expected the ice," Claire replied, not looking up. "It'll thaw. Not on its own." He nodded. "I'm here if you need backup." Claire turned and met his eyes. "With respect, Mr. Langston, I've been fighting without backup most of my life. I don't expect that to change now." Richard gave a dry chuckle. "Fair enough." He hesitated at the door. "One more thing," he added. "You're not here to prove yourself. Not to them. Not to me. You already did." She nodded but didn't smile. "Not yet." By week's end, Claire had submitted a restructuring proposal for how international contracts were reviewed. It included blind audits, multilanguage legal checks, and an ethics panel for partner evaluations. The document landed on every executive desk with a clear note. Prevention is the only cure for corporate blindness. David didn't even try to hide his sneer. Claire noticed, and didn't flinch. She was here now. In the building, at the table. And this time she wasn't going anywhere. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Claire's presence on the executive floor unsettled people in ways they didn't verbalize. No one dared confront her openly, but she felt it in every sideways glance, every forced smile, every accidental exclusion from casual conversations in the break room. This wasn't overt war. It was polite sabotage. Her inbox occasionally received incomplete reports. Her requests for financial audits were answered late or lost in transition. Meeting invites were mysteriously missing her name. It was the oldest trick in corporate power plays. Smother through silence. But Claire had survived worse. Much worse. She simply documented every misstep. Quietly, patiently, with the same methodical thoroughness that had made her one of the most respected translators in her field before her erasure. She took meetings no one else wanted. Junior analysts, cross-cultural interns, and entry-level contract assistants. They told her what the old guard would never admit. "Ms. Thomas," said a soft-spoken associate one afternoon, nervously adjusting her glasses. "David's team rerouted the Sentinel contract review to a private server. You weren't copied." Claire's jaw tightened slightly. "Did you save a time-stamped copy of the access log?" The associate blinked. "Yes, ma'am. I wasn't sure what to do." "You did exactly what you should. Email it to me, then back it up to an external hard drive and take it home." "Home?" Claire leaned forward, voice low and firm. "Never underestimate how far people will go to bury the truth when their power is threatened." By Friday, she had enough data to prove that internal sabotage was quietly underway. Her reforms were more than a nuisance to the old boys club. They were a threat. Claire knew the pattern well. When systems built on exclusion meet resistance, they don't attack head-on. They constrict. Like a snake tightening its coil, they push back in invisible ways. But this time, she wasn't going to let it slide. Not now. Not ever again. Richard Langston called an emergency senior leadership meeting that afternoon. Claire entered the boardroom ahead of him, placing a series of sealed folders in front of each executive. The air in the room buzzed with confusion and curiosity. When Richard arrived, his tone was clipped. "This meeting is off calendar, but necessary," he said. "Claire, go ahead." Claire stood and addressed the room without a single note in front of her. "In the last 10 days, 5 international compliance documents have been deliberately routed around my office. I have evidence of unauthorized system access and internal log tampering. 3 audit reports were altered between drafts, and critical legal information was withheld, intentionally. She paused, letting that sink in. I've compiled every incident. Each of you has a copy in front of you. These aren't errors. This is targeted interference. Whispers exploded across the table. David Randall's expression turned from amusement to irritation. This is absurd, he barked. Mistakes happen. And most of these files were handled by junior staff. Claire turned her gaze on him. It was cold, sharp, and precise. Then I'm sure you won't mind if our cybersecurity team performs a full forensic sweep of your department servers and personnel terminals. David opened his mouth, closed it. Richard didn't wait. It's already been authorized, he said. The sweep begins Monday morning. Silence fell. Claire closed her folder and looked around the room. I didn't come here to play games. I came to fix what was broken. And if anyone here has a problem with that, now's a good time to say so. No one did. But that didn't mean the war was over. Later that night, Claire stood alone at the office window, the skyline flickering like a circuit board beneath a heavy sky. The city glowed with ambition, but not everyone welcomed change. Her phone buzzed with a message from her daughter, Layla. Saw your photo on the internal bulletin. You look like a boss, Mom. She smiled for the first time that day. Layla had just graduated from college. Full scholarship. Honors. Claire had scrubbed floors so her daughter could study in peace. She would face down every boardroom snake, every smirking executive, every veiled whisper, for Layla. For every person like them who had been told they were too quiet, too black, too unqualified to lead. The next morning, Claire arrived to find her office door slightly ajar. Inside, her desk had been rearranged. Her files were untouched, but her chair had been turned to face the window, her notebooks stacked upside down. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. We see you. Claire didn't call security. She didn't panic. She simply walked to her desk, calmly straightened everything, and placed a fresh camera on the bookshelf. Visible, obvious, and blinking red. Let them see that she saw them too. The sabotage didn't stop, but it started to stumble. Claire's reforms were catching fire across the lower departments. New hires began citing her policy drafts in meetings. A quiet loyalty bloomed among the younger staff, the ones who'd always felt unseen. She wasn't just rewriting legal protocols. She was rewriting culture. And the old guard? They were panicking. One evening, Claire stepped into the elevator and found herself face to face with David Randall. Alone. He said nothing for the first 20 floors. Then he leaned in, voice low and bitter. You don't belong here. Claire didn't flinch. No, she said softly. You just spent 20 years making sure I didn't. The elevator dinged. She stepped off first, and didn't look back. The Monday cybersecurity sweep yielded its first clue before noon. Claire sat in her office, watching a young IT investigator scroll through lines of data on her screen. He was barely 26, his face half buried under a hoodie, and his name tag read Malik J. But his fingers moved like a concert pianist's. There, Malik said, pointing to a red flag on the network map. 3 unauthorized access points pinged the internal drive holding the Sentinel contract. At 2:14 a.m. Saturday morning, Claire raised an eyebrow. No one's supposed to have after-hours access without written authorization. Exactly, he nodded. But these credentials weren't fake. They were real, high-level. Looks like someone used a director's login from a remote access port. Claire leaned forward. Whose login? Malik hesitated, then exhaled. Randall's. Of course it was. But that wasn't the part that made Claire's stomach tighten. Malik clicked a few more times. There's also an export log. Someone downloaded the finalized version and re-uploaded a modified draft 3 hours later. Claire's heart pounded. What changed? Malik tilted his head. Clause 9.6, Vendor Liability. The original version protected Langston Dynamics from legal exposure if the tech failed. The new version removes that clause entirely. In other words, Claire said slowly. If something goes wrong, the company takes full responsibility. Malik nodded grimly. That could cost hundreds of millions if the rollout fails. The sabotage, Claire thought. They're setting me up. She'd already signed off on the draft thinking it was clean. They were counting on that. Counting on her being too new, too trusting, too inexperienced to catch it in time. This wasn't office politics anymore. This was a corporate hit job. That evening, Claire called Professor Henry Osei and walked him through what she'd found. You're dealing with a coup, he said bluntly. They can't fire you openly, so they're creating a catastrophic error they can pin on you. If I hadn't caught this, Langston Dynamics would have lost billions. Shareholder lawsuits, CEO resignation, all traceable back to your signature. And you'd be the one scapegoated in every headline. Claire felt the chill of that truth down her spine. I need to fix this. You need to expose it, Henry corrected. Fixing it lets them try again. Exposing it ends them. By Tuesday, Claire had launched a quiet audit trail of her own. She looped in 2 allies from internal finance and HR, women who had quietly supported her changes and shared her vision for a more transparent company. Together, they compiled system logs, time-stamped access records, version histories, and metadata from every file tied to the Sentinel project. The evidence grew like a mountain of quiet rage. What shocked her most was how coordinated the sabotage had been. It wasn't just David. 3 other directors had access to the draft. 2 had signed off on it after changes were made. 1 had even scheduled a media leak for post-deal celebration. They were laying the trap in advance, waiting for her to fall in, then planning to step over her to clean up the mess. Claire stood before the whiteboard in her office, looking at the web of names and timestamps she'd scribbled in dry erase ink. They were going to bury me alive. She called Richard that night. I need a private meeting, she said. No phones, no assistants, just us. He agreed without hesitation. They met in his penthouse 2 hours later, overlooking the river. Richard poured coffee for both of them, and for once he didn't speak first. Claire opened a manila folder and spread the documents across the coffee table. System logs, metadata chains, access violations, modified drafts, false sign-offs. She laid it all out. Richard's expression darkened with every passing second. They were going to pin it on you, he muttered. Yes. While you were saving this company, they were trying to destroy you. She nodded. Richard stood and walked to the window. He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then, finally, what do you want to do? Claire met his gaze. I want to end it. Not privately, not quietly. I want everyone to see what they did. I want the board, the shareholders, the employees, all of them, to know how power was used to silence someone like me. And I want you to stand next to me when I do it. He nodded slowly. I will. The emergency board meeting was set for Friday, but Claire wasn't waiting for an invitation. By Thursday afternoon, she submitted a formal whistleblower complaint to the Langston Dynamics Ethics Committee, with a signed affidavit, multiple collaborating witnesses, and digital forensic evidence verified by Henry's independent lab. The report made its way across the company like a thunderclap. David Randall's office went dark the next morning. He didn't show up for work. 3 other senior executives followed suit. By 10:30 a.m., news of the Sentinel Clause modification had reached the shareholders. By noon, Richard had publicly confirmed an internal investigation was underway. Claire was calm through it all, prepared, poised. She sat in the same boardroom where she'd once stood in a maid's uniform, now in a dark green blazer, her nameplate reading, Dr. Clarissa Thomas, Director of International Affairs. The table was longer now, but she was still at the head of it. When Richard entered the room that afternoon, he didn't bring coffee or a smirk. He brought silence. Then he addressed the board in full. Some of you conspired to sabotage a critical contract and to destroy the reputation of the very person who saved this company from disaster only weeks ago. That person is seated right there, he said, pointing to Claire. He paused, his voice firmer than anyone had heard in months. And if any of you think I'm going to allow this company to fall back into old habits, Let me assure you, I will not. He turned to Claire. The floor is yours. Claire rose. No fear. No bitterness. Just truth. She walked to the screen and clicked the remote. Slide 1, timeline of sabotage. Slide 2, access credentials. Slide 3, intended outcome and media leak. Slide 4, recovered draft, compared to the original. And finally, her signature and the forged version. The board sat in stunned silence. Then the CEO of one of Langston's satellite offices muttered, "This is criminal." "Yes," Claire said. "It is." The chairman asked the final question. "What do you want us to do?" Claire didn't hesitate. "Let the law handle them, but let us fix this culture. For good." The news broke by dawn. Sabotage exposed at Langston Dynamics. Senior executives under investigation. Whistleblower director prevents billion-dollar catastrophe. From housekeeper to hero, Dr. Clarissa Thomas stuns corporate world. Claire's name was everywhere. So was her face. Photographs of her walking into the boardroom, chin held high, briefcase in hand, blazer sharp as steel. Those images flooded the business news cycle, accompanied by headlines that ranged from admiring to astonished to barely concealed disbelief. By mid-morning, 3 senior executives had resigned. David Randall was suspended indefinitely pending criminal investigation. Richard Langston issued a formal internal memo, his most honest one to date. What happened here was not only illegal, it was rooted in arrogance, privilege, and prejudice. We failed to protect the integrity of our leadership. But one woman, once overlooked by all of us, refused to stay silent. And because of her, this company still stands. It was a powerful statement. But words alone wouldn't fix what had been broken. Claire knew that. And so did the employees watching closely. The office atmosphere changed overnight. People didn't whisper anymore. They watched. Not just Claire, but each other. Everyone began asking silent questions. Am I part of the problem? Have I dismissed someone unfairly? Would I have spoken up if I'd known? There was guilt, shame, even resentment. But most of all, there was curiosity. Who was Claire, really? Some still couldn't believe it. Others were in awe, and a few hated her for being right. 2 days later, Claire sat in the glass conference room with Richard, the HR director, the new interim legal head, and a trusted representative from the Employee Ethics Committee. She stood at the whiteboard and began outlining her vision, not for just restoring integrity, but reinventing the company's DNA. "This isn't a patch," she said. "It's a reconstruction." They listened, scribbling notes as she continued. Langston Dynamics needs more than policies. It needs a cultural immune system. It needs values that don't just live on a plaque in the lobby, but in the day-to-day behavior of leadership. She clicked her remote. A slide appeared. Culture Reboot Initiative. The core tenets. Equity in evaluation, performance reviews to be anonymized and reviewed by diverse panels. Bias Training 2.0, mandatory quarterly sessions focusing on implicit bias and institutional accountability, not surface-level HR compliance. Open Door Weeks, every executive must host open office hours, allowing employees from any department to raise concerns, without chain of command fear. Internal audits, quarterly, with reports released company-wide. Transparency was now law. Diversity acceleration path. Identify and invest in underrepresented employees with leadership potential. Richard leaned back in his chair. "Are we ready for this?" he asked. "We weren't ready for what happened either," Claire said. But that didn't stop it. Later that day, Claire gathered her team. New hires, promoted juniors, and a handful of seasoned but open-minded staff. She laid out a clear directive. "You're not here to cover my blind spots. You're here to challenge the system. Don't become what we're trying to change." One of the new analysts, a young black man named Marcus, raised his hand. "Dr. Thomas, can I ask something real?" "Always," she said. "Why come back? Why put yourself through this place again after what they did to you?" The room went quiet. Claire paused, then answered, "Because they didn't break me, and because there are people watching, people who look like us, wondering if it's worth fighting for something better. I'm here to show them it is. Marcus nodded slowly, and the room exhaled. Across the company, the reforms began to ripple outward. In less than a month, employee reporting increased by 45%. Not because things were worse, but because people finally felt safe enough to speak. 3 rising stars from marginalized backgrounds were invited to present to the board. 2 internal promotions came directly from Claire's Cultural Acceleration Program. And the company's public approval rating, shattered after the sabotage headlines, began to climb again. But not everyone was clapping. Some resented the shift in power. They whispered that Richard had gone soft, that Claire's rise was a PR stunt, a diversity token made queen for optics. She heard it all, but she didn't stop. Because truth didn't need applause. It just needed to endure. One night, Claire stayed late reviewing a proposal from the Tokyo branch. The office was quiet, desks empty, lights dimmed. She sipped lukewarm coffee as she flipped through pages. Then she heard it, a soft knock at her door. It opened and Richard stepped in. He looked tired, older than he had the month before. Guilt had carved new lines into his face. "I didn't just want to apologize to you," he said. "I wanted to thank you for staying." Claire glanced up from her papers. "I didn't stay for you," she said evenly. "I know," he nodded. "But I'm grateful anyway." He walked to the window, looked out at the city glowing like circuitry beneath them. "You were right about the culture, about everything. I built this company, but I never built it to see people. I saw talent, profit, power, but not people." Claire didn't reply. "Not yet. And the truth is," he continued, "I didn't just fail you. I failed everyone I was supposed to lead." Now Claire looked up. "No," she said, "you failed yourself, but you still have the power to change that." He turned, met her eyes. "Will you help me?" She didn't smile, but she nodded. "Yes, as long as you're willing to listen." "I am," he said quietly, and for the first time in years he meant it. Progress, real progress, never comes quietly. For every employee now inspired by Claire's leadership, there were others who felt cornered, stripped of their unchecked influence, threatened by accountability, and exposed by transparency. And those who had once ruled the company from the shadows weren't about to go quietly. They just changed tactics. Behind the thick glass walls of the executive lounge, a handful of remaining loyalists to the old guard gathered after hours, those not yet pushed out or caught by the investigation. The group was smaller now, but no less dangerous. The ringleader was Kevin Miles, Senior Vice President of Finance. He had survived the initial wave by staying just clean enough. But Kevin knew how power worked. It didn't vanish, it shifted. And if he couldn't control it outright anymore, he could still bend it. "This company's becoming a joke," he muttered to the others, sipping from a lowball glass. "All this equity training, these open-door sessions. We're bleeding culture for the sake of optics." A woman across from him, Victoria Bell, head of operations in Europe, nodded stiffly. "It's unsustainable," she said. "Thomas is throwing out decades of structure. She may have caught David, but she's pushing too fast. She's making enemies." Kevin leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time we remind everyone what happens when you try to flip the pyramid upside down." The next day, whispers began circulating again. Not among the junior staff, but in upper-tier circles. Claire is overstepping her mandate. Claire is using this role to settle old scores. Claire falsified her academic credentials and is using a fake name. The last one was subtle, vicious, and hard to prove false without reopening wounds Claire had fought for years to keep closed. Emails appeared in inboxes anonymously, questioning the validity of her Stanford background. Social media chatter flared around screenshots of decade-old articles about Michelle Carter's academic misconduct. It was her past, twisted, resurrected, weaponized. When Claire first saw the article resurface, it was in a forwarded email from an intern with a subject line, "You should know this is making the rounds." She clicked the link. There it was, her face from years ago, young, bright-eyed, unbroken. The headline beneath it like a dagger, Ivy League star shamed by scandal, the fall of Michelle Carter. Her hands trembled for only a moment. Then she closed the tab. She had feared this day might come. The day when anonymity, once her shield, would no longer protect her. But now, she wasn't hiding. Not anymore. She took a breath and walked to Richard's office. He looked up when she entered, the expression on his face showing he already knew. "I saw it," he said. "Of course you did," Claire replied. "They want to discredit everything before it cements." "Want to shut it down?" She shook her head. "No, I want to address it. Head on. On record." Richard leaned back in his chair, surprised. Claire's voice was firm. "I want every employee to hear the truth. My truth. Not their version." That Friday, Richard called an all-staff company-wide assembly, streamed to every international office. It had only happened once before in company history. Claire stood alone at the podium, wearing a black blazer with no frills and no script. She didn't need notes to speak her truth. "Most of you know me as Dr. Clarissa Thomas, Director of International Affairs. But years ago, I was known by another name, Dr. Michelle Carter. I was a professor, a researcher, a speaker. And then I was falsely accused, framed, by those who couldn't tolerate a black woman succeeding in a place they thought was theirs by birthright. The system didn't protect me. It erased me. So I disappeared. I took a name I could hide behind. I survived. I worked. Until now." She paused, letting the silence settle like dust. "You may wonder why I'm telling you this. It's because the truth matters. It's because no one should have to bury who they are to make others feel comfortable. It's because every company, this company, should stand on a foundation of fairness, not fear. And it's because if I can walk back into the light after years in the shadows, then maybe so can you." There was no thunderous applause, just stillness, reflection, and something far deeper than clapping, respect. In the days that followed, the lies began to lose their power, because Claire didn't run from them, she faced them down. And the people who watched her do it began to ask themselves harder questions than ever before. Kevin Miles was furious. His last weapon had failed. And now, backed into a corner, he made a final reckless move. He leaked internal financial reports to an outside journalist, documents showing company spending before Claire's reforms, attempting to make it appear that she'd mismanaged budget allocations in her first month. The story almost broke. Almost. But Claire had already instituted a double verification system on all budget approvals. And her team, loyal, meticulous, had flagged the false drafts before they could reach the press. Richard personally confronted Kevin. "You forged financials," he said, "and tried to bury one of the only honest leaders this company has ever had." Kevin didn't deny it. He just smiled, bitter and tired. "She doesn't belong here," he said. "She'll never belong here, no matter what title you give her." Richard's reply was short. "You're fired." That evening, Claire walked alone through the building, floor by floor. She didn't speak. She just observed. Some employees nodded as she passed. Some looked away. Some offered small smiles. She had been their maid, then their mystery. Now, she was becoming something far more powerful. A mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable. But they also make them see. It had been exactly 90 days since Claire had stood at the head of the boardroom and revealed the sabotage. 90 days since she'd gone from an invisible worker in the background to one of the most powerful and visible figures in Langston Dynamics. But she wasn't interested in power for its own sake. She was building something deeper, and she was starting from the roots. At the Monday morning executive briefing, Claire took the floor once again, this time without scandal, without protest, without resistance. She presented a single proposal: the Bridge Initiative. "Policies are only as strong as the people who live them," she said. "We've updated systems. Now we must develop souls." The room listened, attentive. Even the skeptics had learned that silence was no longer a defense. The Bridge Initiative focused on human change. Mentorship programs pairing senior executives with junior employees from underrepresented backgrounds. Reverse shadowing days, where executives would walk in the shoes of customer service reps, janitors, and support staff. Legacy Spotlights, a series of company-wide sessions where long-tenured, low-visibility employees could share their stories and be seen. And a new internal platform, the listening room, a digital anonymous space where voices too often ignored could be elevated. Richard approved it within the hour, and Claire launched it within the week. She began where no one else ever would, the janitorial wing. She stood before a row of stunned employees in gray polos and scuffed sneakers and told them, "You matter here, not just because of what you do, but because of who you are. We want your ideas. We need your experience. We can't build the future without the people who built the floors." Some laughed softly. Some blinked back tears. All listened. That week, she spent 2 full workdays shadowing a night crew janitor named Raphael. He didn't say much at first, but by the second night, he was pointing out structural inefficiencies in maintenance coordination. Claire made notes, passed them to operations. 2 weeks later, Raphael's suggestions were implemented. He received a raise, a bonus, and an invitation to contribute to a new building design review. Word spread fast. Claire didn't just talk about equity. She executed it. In another department, a shy research analyst named Ja quietly submitted an idea through the listening room. It outlined a way to restructure product localization across global branches using AI-driven cultural linguistics. An idea that would have taken a senior strategist months to develop. Claire read it twice, then called Ja in. "Where'd you learn this?" she asked. "I worked on localization for my father's family business back in Shanghai," Ja said. "We couldn't afford consultants, so I learned by necessity." "Have you ever presented in a boardroom?" Ja shook her head. "Never even been inside one." Claire smiled. "Next week you will." And she did. Gia's plans saved the company $2.6 million in rollout expenses. Across Langston Dynamics, something had begun to shift. Not in the reports, but in the air. Employees stayed longer after meetings to talk. Junior staff stopped whispering in hallways and began speaking up in team huddles. Department heads started visiting floors they hadn't set foot on in years. One afternoon, a facilities tech paused Claire in the elevator. "You changed everything," she said quietly. "We used to just clean these floors. Now we feel like we walk them." Claire didn't respond immediately. She just nodded, heart tight. But not everything was simple. With change came vulnerability. And with vulnerability came doubt. There were days when Claire questioned whether this was sustainable. Whether she was moving too fast. Whether the old guard was just waiting, silent, behind polished doors, letting her burn herself out before reclaiming their throne. But every time that fear crept in, something small and meaningful would happen. A thank you note from a new intern. A promotion recommendation from a senior VP who had once resisted her. A young black analyst who whispered, "Because of you, I don't shrink anymore." Those moments became her fuel. Because real revolutions are rarely loud. They start in small rooms, in quiet courage, in the decision to speak when silence is safer. One night, as Claire walked through the now-renovated employee lounge, she paused to look at a new art piece on the wall. It was a mosaic, made of photos submitted by employees from all branches, departments, and positions. Hundreds of faces, arranged into a single image. The company logo. A small plaque beneath it read, "One name, many stories, all matter. Bridge Initiative, Phase 1. She stared at it for a long moment, then turned to find Richard standing behind her. "I never thought this place could feel human," he said quietly. Claire looked at him. "Humans were always here. You just never saw them." He nodded, eyes tired but clear. "I see them now." Later, she returned to her office and opened a notebook. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "Legacy is not made by titles. Legacy is made by impact. Quiet, steady, undeniable impact." She underlined the last line twice, then closed the notebook and turned off the light. 3 months after Claire launched the Bridge Initiative, Langston Dynamics was being hailed in national business journals as a case study in cultural turnaround. From scandal to standard-bearer. How one company rewrote its DNA. The woman who changed corporate America, without changing who she was. Claire Thomas. Justice, strategy, and the new executive model. Her inbox was flooded. Conference invites, university keynotes, panel discussions on ethics, diversity, leadership. Journalists requested interviews. TV producers pitched documentaries. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who had survived erasure and come back swinging. But with each glowing headline came a new kind of pressure. The world was watching, and not everyone watching was rooting for her. Claire stood in her office one morning, watching the sun rise across the skyline. She'd barely slept, not from overwork but from over-awareness. The more public she became, the more dangerous it felt. She was being called a trailblazer, a reformer, even a hero. But Claire didn't care about titles. She cared about the people still working in the dark corners of corporate America, who had no platform, no voice, and no safe space to speak. She wasn't a symbol. She was still a worker, still fighting. That morning, her assistant, Ivy, entered with an urgent look. "There's something you need to see," she said, holding out her tablet. Claire glanced down at the headline. Claire Thomas accused of fabricated credentials in anonymous complaint to SEC. Her stomach dropped. The article referenced an anonymous whistleblower filing, a formal complaint to the Securities and Exchange Commission claiming that Claire had misrepresented her qualifications and background when taking her executive role. They were dragging Michelle Carter back into the fire. Ivy spoke quietly. "Do you want me to call Richard?" "No," Claire said calmly. "Let's call my attorney first." By noon, the entire company had seen the headline. Some employees approached her with concern. Others avoided her completely. And a few, those who had never wanted her there, smirked as if victory was imminent. Claire sat across from her legal team in a quiet boardroom. The lead counsel, a confident black woman named Ayanna Briggs, leaned forward. "It's weak. A fishing expedition at best. They're grasping for contradictions between your pre-Langston past and your current resume. You never lied about anything. You disclosed your change of identity in full to Richard and the board months ago. So this is just noise?" Ayanna hesitated. "Yes, but loud noise. And you're high profile now. That means headlines matter more than facts. We'll respond officially. But you need to brace yourself. They're trying to make you toxic again." That evening, Claire walked through the building alone. She stepped into a side elevator, went down to the lower levels, and wandered into the old housekeeping locker room. The same one she used to change in, silently, for nearly 20 years. The scent of industrial soap still clung to the air. The benches were the same. So were the lockers. She sat on the bench where she once used to cry silently before long shifts. She ran her fingers across the cool steel of locker number 38. Her name had never been on it. Just a label that read, "Thomas Maid third shift." She closed her eyes. She'd come so far. But the world hadn't changed as much as it pretended. The next morning, Claire arrived early and addressed her team. She didn't hide from the news. "I know some of you have questions," she began. "Yes, the SEC received an anonymous complaint. No, there's no truth to the claims. And yes, I'll keep doing the work regardless." A few team members stood and applauded. Others nodded. But one hand rose in the back. It was Marcus, the sharp young analyst she'd mentored from the start. He looked concerned. "Dr. Thomas, do you ever wish you'd just stayed in the background?" The question stunned the room. But Claire didn't blink. "Yes," she said. "Some nights I do. It's easier to clean the floor than to lead the boardroom. Fewer knives in your back." Marcus lowered his eyes, but she continued. "But then I remember silence never saved me, and it won't save anyone coming behind me. So I keep speaking, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The room was still. Then applause broke again, this time louder. Claire gave a small smile, not for approval, for relief. They still believed. And that mattered more than the headlines. That week, Richard stood before the board and read a statement into the record. Langston Dynamics remains unwavering in its support of Dr. Claire Thomas. Her qualifications, contributions, and integrity are beyond dispute. This anonymous attack is not just on her, it's on the very progress we've worked to achieve. We will not allow it to derail our direction. The board voted unanimously to release the statement publicly. The markets stabilized. But Claire knew the deeper war wasn't on paper. It was cultural, and it wasn't over. At home, Claire finally called her daughter, Layla. "Mom, I saw the article," Layla said immediately. "You okay?" "I'm tired," Claire admitted. "But I'm not broken." Layla was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you ever wish you'd quit back then? When they erased you the first time?" Claire thought carefully. "No," she said, "because if I had, I wouldn't be here to help rebuild what they tried to destroy." Layla's voice softened. "You've already won, Mom. You just don't see it yet." That night, Claire drafted her own op-ed. She didn't wait for the media to write her truth. She wrote it herself. It began with one line: "You can bury a name, but not a voice." By Monday morning, Claire's op-ed had gone viral. Over 3.2 million views in 48 hours. Shared by CEOs, civil rights leaders, professors, activists, even students. It was titled, "They Tried to Erase Me. I Became Louder." And it opened like this: "Once I was told to clean the room. Now I lead it. My name is Dr. Clarissa Michelle Carter Thomas. And this is how I came back from being erased." In the article, she detailed everything. Her rise, her fall, the false accusations, the silence that followed, and the years spent wearing someone else's name just to survive. She named no enemies. She threw no punches. She simply told the truth. And the world finally listened. Talk shows quoted her lines. Students printed her paragraphs on dorm walls. Executives copied her into emails they once never would have sent. She wasn't just a corporate executive anymore. She was a movement. But inside Langston Dynamics, the attention sparked two very different responses. Some embraced it. Employees proud that the company had become a beacon of courage and reform. Others tightened their collars, wary of the spotlight, murmuring about too much attention, external distractions, and whether Claire's presence had become too big for the brand. The board was split. Richard, for his part, made his stance clear. "She's not a distraction," he said during the next board meeting. "She's the reason this company still has a future." Still, whispers spread, and Claire heard them. On Thursday, she received an unexpected visitor. Daniel Holt, a publisher from a major business imprint. They met in her office. His briefcase spotless, his words polished. "We'd like to offer you a book deal," he said. "Your story, in your voice, full control. No ghostwriters." Claire blinked. "Why now?" "Because you're redefining what leadership looks like in the 21st century, he said. "And because millions of people don't just want to read your op-ed. They want to understand your journey." Claire didn't answer immediately, because that word, journey, meant something different to her. It wasn't just about her fall and rise. It was about every woman scrubbing conference room floors with a PhD buried in her pocket. Every immigrant who translated contracts in their head while filing spreadsheets. Every young voice silenced because they didn't look the part. Could she tell that story? Should she? That night, she went home and opened the metal box where her old life still lived. She pulled out her Stanford ID. She looked at the old letters of apology never sent. She found the list she once made the day she left academia. What I lost. My title. My platform. My future. My name. Then on the back she'd written, "What they can't take. My mind. My voice. My daughter. My dignity." She had forgotten she wrote that. But now, she remembered. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to write it all down for the world. The next morning, she walked into her office, greeted Ivy with a quiet nod, and opened her inbox. There was a new message from the dean of Stanford's linguistics department. Subject: a long overdue invitation. She opened it. "Dr. Thomas, we owe you more than an apology. We owe you our ears, our platform, our students. Would you consider returning to give the keynote at our spring symposium on cultural translation and truth-telling? The students are already organizing a panel around your op-ed. With respect, Dean Ariel Banerjee. Claire sat back. She hadn't stepped foot on that campus since the day she walked off. Humiliated, her office cleared out by a junior admin too scared to speak to her directly. Now they wanted her to come back. As a speaker, not a scandal. She didn't answer right away. She simply closed the laptop and stared out the window. Later that day, Marcus approached her after a team meeting. "Can I ask something personal?" he said. Claire nodded. "What's next for you?" She smiled slightly. "What do you mean?" "You've changed this place. Changed us. But you always look like you're thinking about something beyond these walls." Claire looked down at the notes in her hands. Then at Marcus, sharp, loyal and hungry for more. She handed him the folder. "I need someone to run phase 2 of the Bridge Initiative. With a little more autonomy." His eyes widened. "Me? You're ready. And you?" She exhaled. "I might not be here forever. And that's the point. Legacy means building something that outlives you." By week's end, Claire had accepted the book deal with one condition: that half the proceeds go toward funding scholarships for first-generation college students in marginalized communities. She also wrote back to Stanford. Her reply was short. "Yes, I'll speak. But not for your faculty. For your students. Because they're the ones who deserve the truth. I will speak. And I will be seen." The next morning, she met Richard in the upper-level lounge. They sat by the windows, city below, silence between them. "I've been thinking," she said. He waited. "When I leave this place, whenever that is, I want to leave it in good hands." "You've already done more than any of us expected," Richard said softly. Claire looked at him, a rare softness in her expression. "That's the thing," she said. "No one should be surprised when a black woman leads. That's the culture I'm still building. And until I finish that work, I'm staying." Richard raised his coffee cup in salute. "To staying." Claire raised hers. "To preparing to leave with purpose." They clinked their mugs together, not as boss and employee, but as co-architects of a better future. The Stanford campus hadn't changed much. The sandstone walls still glowed golden under the California sun. The air still buzzed with promise. Students still hurried past on bikes, backpacks bouncing, headphones in, futures ahead of them. But Claire had changed. She stepped out of the Blacktown car in a navy suit. Nothing flashy, just elegant. Her hair was swept up, her stride even. At her side was Layla, now a college graduate herself, walking like a shadow and a shield. Neither of them said much as they crossed the quad. Claire could feel the ghosts here, the lecture halls that once rang with her voice, the office that had been emptied overnight, the whispering colleagues who turned away when she needed them most. But today she wasn't here for them. She was here for the students. Inside Memorial Auditorium, the crowd was already seated. Over 800 students, faculty, alumni, and invited guests filled the room. Some held printed copies of her op-ed. Others wore pins with her initials, CMT. The stage was lit. A single podium waited in the center. Dean Ariel Banerjee welcomed her with humility and grace. "It is my distinct honor," he said, "to welcome back someone whose story redefined resilience, and whose voice helped rebuild trust where silence once reigned. Please welcome Dr. Clarissa Michelle Thomas." The applause rose slowly, then erupted. Claire walked to the podium without hesitation. And when she stood behind the microphone, the room fell silent. "There was a time when I believed this room had taken everything from me." Her voice was calm, strong. "I walked out of this campus with no dignity, no defense, and no name that felt safe to wear. I was told to stay quiet, to move on, to fade. I did. For 20 years, I worked under a name that wasn't mine. I cleaned offices instead of teaching in them. I poured drinks in boardrooms where I used to be invited to speak." She paused, letting the weight of it settle. "But what they didn't know was that while they buried me, I was growing roots. I never stopped learning. I never stopped watching. And when the time came, I translated more than just language. I translated injustice into action. I translated silence into change. The crowd hung on every word. To every student here who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased, you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not your shame. You are becoming. A murmur swept through the room. Not noise, emotion. To every young black woman who was told to smile more, soften more, disappear more, take up space, use your voice, and never apologize for your brilliance. A standing ovation began to rise. She continued, "My name is Dr. Clarissa Michelle Carter Thomas. I am no longer hiding. I am no longer asking for permission to exist in rooms I once built. I am reclaiming every piece of myself that was ever stolen, shamed, or silenced. And now, so can you." By the end of her speech, every person in the auditorium was on their feet. Some were clapping. Some were crying. Some stood in stunned silence. Claire stepped back from the microphone and gave a small, quiet nod. She hadn't just delivered a lecture. She had delivered closure. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. After the event, students lined up to shake her hand, take pictures, ask questions. One young woman, barely 20, stepped forward with trembling hands. "I read your story in high school," she whispered. "It kept me going. I want to be a translator too." Claire took her hands gently. "Then do it. And don't wait for someone to give you permission." Behind her, Layla stood wiping away tears. Claire turned and embraced her. "This," Layla whispered, "was everything." Claire nodded. "It's only the beginning." Back at Langston Dynamics a week later, Claire called a company-wide town hall. She stood at the front of the same boardroom where her journey of transformation began. But this time, it wasn't about contracts or sabotage. It was about legacy. "I've spent 2 decades becoming visible again. And now that I am, my greatest responsibility is not to hold the spotlight. It's to pass the torch." She turned toward Marcus, now heading the Bridge Initiative. "This company isn't changed because of me. It's changed because all of us started telling the truth and acting on it. My next chapter is in writing, in teaching, in building leaders, not just prophets. So I'll be stepping down from my current role in 90 days. Gasps echoed. A pause. Then a slow rise of applause. And respect. Claire smiled. "But I'm not disappearing. I'm evolving. And I hope you do too." 3 months later, Claire stood on stage once more. This time not in an office or a university, but at the launch event for her foundation, the Thomas Bridge Initiative for Equity in Leadership. Its mission: to fund scholarships, provide mentorship, and place voices from underserved communities in boardrooms across the world. At the center of the stage sat a small wooden chair. She tapped it gently and addressed the crowd. "This chair represents every table I wasn't invited to. Every meeting I served drinks at instead of leading. Every room where I was seen as less than. Today, we're not just building bridges. We're building more chairs. And no one will be left standing in silence again." As the room rose in thunderous applause, Claire stood tall. Not as a symbol of survival, but as a living legacy. Not just seen, not just heard, but unforgettable. Maybe you saw yourself in her. Maybe not. But you saw something. A woman they tried to bury, standing taller than those who mocked her. A name they tried to erase, spoken now in rooms they never imagined. A voice silenced, now thundering across boardrooms, campuses, and headlines. And here's the truth. This isn't just Claire's story. This is a mirror. How many people in your life, maybe even you, have been underestimated, overlooked, ignored? How many janitors, waitresses, night shift workers, immigrants, single parents have you passed by, never wondering what brilliance was buried beneath the surface? Claire wasn't lucky. She was ready. She was qualified even when they refused to see it. She was brilliant even when they called her a maid. She was watching, learning, growing quietly, patiently, powerfully, until it was time. And now, It's your time. If you've ever been told you're too quiet, too unfit, too old, too different, this story was meant for you. If you've ever held back a truth to protect someone else's comfort, this is your invitation. If you've ever stood in a room full of people who overlooked your worth, you already understand Claire more than you know. But now the question isn't about her. It's about you. What will you do with your brilliance? What will you reclaim? What legacy are you building, not someday but today? Share this story with someone who's on the edge of giving up. Speak someone's name that deserves to be heard. Create a chair. Build a bridge. Open a door. Because what we saw in Claire we can become. And what they tried to erase, we'll write in bold, permanent ink.